Hey guys, welcome to Breaking Food. Um, we are coming close to the end of the year, and not just the end of the year, the end of the DCEU. So I kind of want to go over the history of how it started and how it led up to this DCEU being axed off and completely being rebooted. So yeah, and I'm gonna start from 2013's Man of Steel. I'm not gonna go all the way back with Dwayne Johnson's '06 news or '07 news of Black Hands, because that would, in itself, it's separate, but I'm gonna put part of the history. So let's get started. So it started out around the time, I think it was either the development of in Inception or Dark Knight Rises, somewhere around the time, because Inception came out in 2010, Dark Knight Rises was 2012, but around like the production of one of those two films, Chris Nolan, who at this point was in, I think, pre-production of Dark Knight Rises, had rated Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, thought of a realistic take on Superman. This was before Avengers had hit, and at this point, uh, the last Superman movie was in '06 was Brandon Routh's Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer, and that in itself um, was a Christopher Reeve Superman film because it was a continuation, and in a sense, since that movie didn't perform as well as Warner Bros. Expected to, they kind of axed off the Christopher Reeve series, and at this point, they were like, you know what, let's reboot the whole thing. So we haven't had a new take on, the Man of Steel ever since the 1970s with Superman the movie. This was at a time where I don't think they really had an idea on expanding the universe. They have attempted to in the past with '07 canceled George Miller's film um Justice League Immortals. I'm pretty sure just a script out there. There's a bunch of videos on this subject. Weirdly enough, two of the cast members of that were supposed to be in that movie ended up being in the DCU, particularly in the Shazam films. So yeah. From there on, he thought of a more grounded take on Superman. Kind of like how he did with the Dark Knight trilogy. So yeah. And at this point, I, th- they really wanted to do it, and this is at a point where, uh, the reason they wanted to do a realistic take because the Dark Knight trilogy was successful, and on top of that, they tried to actually star Avengers with Green Lantern, and that movie was trying to do a lighthearted comedy, but since it failed, they were like, "Oh, the Dark Knight movies were successful. Let's try and do that." Even with Superman Returns failing in the box office, the only thing that was successful was the Dark Knight trilogy. Let's attempt to kind of, in a sense, do that kind of take and success. Sorry about the mess over here, but let's keep going. So at this point, Snyder and David S. Goyer, who directed Blade Trinity, had experience writing scripts, had tended to do a DC Green Arrow movie, but fell apart, and helped Chris Nolan with the Dark Knight trilogy write the script for Man of Steel, which was originally supposed to be, I think, at one point a sequel to Superman Returns, but then obviously did a whole reboot. At this point, they had submitted it to Warner Bros. And loved it, and Chris Nolan was still doing his Batman films at the time, so they decided to get Zack Snyder. Technically, Man of Steel is not the first DC project that Zack Snyder had worked on. He actually worked on a movie called Watchmen, which came out a year after the Dark Knight film in 2009, which was heavily inspired by the graphic novel. So, yeah, since he was more a visual director, they thought it would be a great idea. Chris Nolan helped with the script and producing of the movie while he was in The Dark Knight Rises. Remember, they Dark Knight Rises came out in 2012. Man of Steel came out in 2013, so there was not enough gaps for Chris Nolan to kind of take over both films. So yeah. So they casted Henry Cavill in 2011, who honestly actually attempted to be Superman in the past. He auditioned for Batman in Batman versus Superman. I mean, not Batman versus Superman. My bad. Oh, Batman Begins. And he also auditioned for Superman Returns, but before it became Superman Returns, originally it was a J.J. Abrams directed movie called Superman, I don't know, Flyby, which then reverted to Superman Returns, and Henry Cavill auditioned. Here's a picture of his audition tape. So that was the picture of Henry Cavill as Superman auditioning for an earlier movie, and this is a picture that Zack Snyder took of him when auditioning for Man of Steel. So yeah, Amy Adams came into it, and this is not her first DC project. Actually, this is also not her first Superman project. She said she was previously casted in Smallville, and she had a role in it. So yeah. We had that movie come out in 2013. Zack Snyder directing, while David S. Goyer and what's his name, Christopher Nolan, writing the script, while Christopher Nolan also produced the movie. That's why you can see this movie felt more of a Chris Nolan and a Zack Snyder collaboration than more of a Snyder film, yeah. That movie came out, and by the time it came out, the Avengers had already came out previously, and honestly, um, uh, Warner Bros. Needed to start a franchise. So that same year, a couple years later, I mean, not a couple years, the same year, a couple months later, I think it was like around a month or two after its release, in Comic Con of 2013, Warner Bros. Announced with Zack Snyder um, a sequel to Man of Steel. Instead of being a Man of Steel 2, it was Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. And that movie was supposed to be released in 2015. And the reason I know it was I know it was originally released in 2015 because I remember the announcement date. You can see it on the internet. The original release date, it was 2015. And it was to a point where Zack Snyder, I think either Zack Snyder or one of the cast members did talk about them shooting Batman vs. Superman next to J.J. Abrams' Star Wars Force Awakens, and borrowing their cameras and whatnot. And that movie came out in December 2015, while Batman vs. Superman came out in 2016. They did delay the movie to 2016, so that they can improve the scripts and whatnot. So we did get announcements for the cast, which was a pretty big news. So we had obviously Henry Cavill coming back as Superman / Clark Kent, but obviously since this is a Batman vs. Superman movie, they had casted Batman, which was Ben Affleck, and he was playing not a Snyder version of Batman. He was, or like, in the past we had the Tim Burton Batman. It was the Tim Burton creation of Batman, the Joel Schumacher creation of Batman, the Christopher Nolan creation of Batman. But this time, instead of creating his own Batman, he decided to get a Batman from the comics, which the Batman in this franchise was the Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns Batman, which Ben Affleck had played. We had Jesse Eisenberg playing Lex Luthor, and then apparently we got Wonder Woman in this film, played by Gal Gadot. And this is the first movie. Well, they didn't really skip the intro. They just showed a snippet of Bruce Wayne's parents passing away, but they skipped the whole origin story of, oh, this is more like, oh, he's been Batman for this long, and now he's already old and beefed up, and he was, apparently fighting Superman, and overall, it was a divided movie. Man of Steel was kind of a divided movie, but I kind of liked it. This was even more divided, mostly towards the negative side. This had 29% Rotten Tomato, but Chris Nolan didn't really have a hand on this, even though he was producer. He didn't write the script. He did have a hand in kind of getting Ben Affleck into the role, but that was pretty much it. It was mostly produced by Deborah Snyder, Zack Snyder's wife, and yeah, this was uh, written by Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer. And we can't forget Hans Zimmer. This dude did the Dark Knight trilogy, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, came back from Man of Steel and did Batman vs. Superman, and would also do 2017's Wonder Woman. The same year we had Batman vs. Superman, we had, I think, yeah, around August. So Batman vs. Superman came out in March. In August, we had Suicide Squad, but we need to take a step forward in between Batman vs. Superman and Suicide Squad. So obviously before last year, the previous year and the year before that, they announced the cast member Will Smith being Deadshot, Margot Robbie being Harley Quinn, Jared Leto being Joker. But we need to talk about this because this is what made the movie not great. So apparently, because of the lower results of Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, they ended up reshooting the movie, the whole entire movie, because of the success of Deadpool. So they need to make it lighthearted. So if you see trailer number 1, or the teaser trailer of Suicide Squad, and watch all the other trailers leading up to the movie, they have two completely different tone. One is darker while the other one's comedy, but the issue is it bombed at the box office. It did not receive well reviews. It was mostly bad. Even fans didn't really like it, and that was because mostly the reshoots, they were trying to do a lighter tone on a movie that was already written and already filmed in a darker tone, so it didn't really work. That movie was directed by David Ayer, and we did have Zack Snyder. I think he was a producer or executive producer, but he did shoot the Flash cameo scene, and Ben Affleck did return for a couple of scenes, including the end credits scene as Batman, aka Bruce Wayne. Then in July of 20, I mean not July, then in 2017 we had Wonder Woman, and that was the first movie since The Dark Knight Rises that we had gotten a good reviewed DC movie. It was well produced. It was written all by Zack Snyder and produced or executive produced by Zack Snyder, and yeah, this movie was amazing. This was actually more of a prequel. The beginning and end of the movie were honestly took place around the same time as Justice League and Batman vs. Superman, Aquaman, but yeah, that was the first movie that was released by that was written by Zack Snyder, but not like produced. I mean, not directed by him. This is more of him being Kevin Feige of the universe. So we gotta talk about Justice League because this did come out later in November of 2017, and we gotta talk about it because it's the biggest thing that effectively destroyed the whole universe. So let's talk about it. So because of the failure of that movie, so when they started filming this, so when they went to production, they started production around the time Batman vs Superman came out, and because of the lackluster success, they decided to make the script a little bit neater and whatnot, and so yeah, and around the time of the shooting in 2016, and this was after Suicide Squad, I believe. Oh yeah, talking about that, we had a Batman vs Superman Ultimate Cut, which added 30 minutes, so the movie itself became 3 hours and was, I would say, better than Batman vs Superman Ultimate Dawn of Justice, the theatrical cut. And I would say that movie is the movie to watch because when that movie came out back in March of 2016, did not like it, but this movie, I even though it came out like later that year, I didn't really watch it until like during the pandemic, and that made the movie much better. Getting onto that topic, Snyder had unfortunately left the production around, I want to say March, like March or April 2017, but this was, he already had filmed most of the things, not everything, like he filmed around 80% of the movie. He had a rough cut, uh, but he had to leave because one of his daughters sadly passed away from suicide. So Joss Whedon came over to kind of direct the rest of the um, Justice League movie, finish it off. But Warner Bros. Had claimed at that time that he was only finishing Snyder's vision, and that was pretty much it. But looking at the film, it was completely awful to the point that it wasn't even that good, honestly. We had the whole so essentially Joss Whedon had reshot most of the movies couple months before the movie had came out in 2017. And in context, Henry Cavill was in production of another movie, Mission Impossible Rogue, was it Rogue Nation, or one of the Mission Impossible movies, the sixth one with Tom Cruise. He had grown a mustache and beard. Here's the issue. Well, apparently apparently the reason he was able to do the reshoots was Tom Cruise had injured himself, but that's a layered subject. So since he injured himself for 6 months, he couldn't do anything. So he had time to do the reshoots for Justice League, but because he had Falcon Beard and was contractually obligated to keep the beard, they had completely removed it through CGI by source. You can search up the images. But because of that, yeah, it did not sit well, and after that, it was already doomed. Um, the whole Snyder vision was gone. And then we had Aquaman 2018. And I think that's the last project that Snyder had touched, in a sense, I guess, because it was supposed to be part of the vision. And then they fired Ray Fisher, who plays Cyborg in this movie. And then they canceled a lot of movies, including a Jared Leto Joker movie. I mean, they didn't really cancel the Joker movie. They replaced Jared Leto with Joaquin Phoenix and made it its own separate universe in 2019. They still had Shazam come out that same year. And what's weird is they started production of Mission Impossible in 2018 and was released in 2018, and it was a success. But the issue was, since they were filming Shazam, they couldn't get Henry Cavill back into the suit, so we had a headless face of Henry Cavill and Shazam. But Aquaman and Shazam both were received well by fans, so yeah. And then around 2019 when Shazam Joker came out, Joker took place in a different universe and was not part of the DCEU as originally intended to be with Jared Leto. They got Joaquin Phoenix and it took place in a different time and different universe. So yeah, Jared Leto was kind of pissed off. So pretty much yeah. And then they were trying to get away from Snyder's vision. And then around the time, Ben Affleck had also dropped as Batman because he hated the reshoots of Justice League and whatnot, and what they did with Zack Snyder. More on that later towards the middle of the video, but Ben Affleck was supposed to write, produce, and direct a Batman movie, and what happened was he ended up um, not directing, but he still was writing, producing, and starring as Batman in the Batman solo project called The Batman. He had Matt Reeves. What? More in that now. So apparently, Matt Reeves took over the project, but because of what Warner Bros. Was doing with him, torturing him, apparently, he dropped out the project. While that, they had canceled Justice League Part 2, Part 3, delayed The Flash, and delayed, and actually didn't even do a Green Lantern show for the DCEU and a movie. No Joker and Harley Quinn crossover movie. Completely changed the Birds of Prey movie to where Jared Leto's no longer there. And yeah, so 2020. Right before the pandemic hit in March, in February of 2020, we had Birds of Prey. This was the first rated R movie within the DCU in theatrical terms, because we did have Batman vs. Superman, but the theatrical cut was PG-13, while the extended cut, which is really the director's cut, was rated R. And then Joker doesn't take place in the DCU. It's rated R, but doesn't take place within that universe. So yeah. Even though Rotten Tomatoes gave it a perfect score, not a lot of people liked it. And they killed off the villain. I mean, he was a Batman villain. I wanted to see him further expanded in the universe. And then, because of the pandemic, towards December, there was a dual release, HBO Max and the theatrical cut of Wonder Woman 84. That movie was god awful, and you can tell. Like, Warner Bros. Had clear visions of trying to step away from Zack Snyder's vision, but here's the issue. Doesn't matter if it's lighter or darker. You have to have a vision. I mean, that's what made films like Logan or Spider-Man 2 amazing. Spider-Man 2 was an amazing film because it was not really just because it was light, but the storytelling. Logan was a dark movie, but because of the storytelling. So yeah. But during 2020, guess what happened? Fans, ever since 2017 and Snyder releasing photos and images of what his Justice League movie would have looked like when he did the 2017 version, fans petition hashtags restore the Snyder Cut, which we got an announcement when Snyder was doing a Man of Steel commentary back in 2020 during the pandemic. Both Henry Cavill and Zack Snyder had announced the Snyder Cut. So yeah, in 2021 we had the Snyder Cut, and yeah, we finally got it, and it was a pretty interesting take. It gave us hope to Superman returning, because they weren't doing anything with Superman. Now I do want to talk about the James Gunn segment and how this ties into what's going on right now. So James Gunn this was after after he released Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which came out the same year as Justice League and Wonder Woman. He went to projection for the third Guardians of the Galaxy, and I guess Disney fired him for old tweets that, I mean, his old tweets were not great, but they were old, and people change, but they fired him. And so around 2018, 2019, DC decided to hire James Gunn because of the success of the two Guardians of the Galaxy films. And so they gave him a whole library of DC characters, and he thought of redoing Suicide Squad. We did have a movie, but he wanted to redo it again, but in his own take. So, since he went to the competitor, Marvel looked at it and hired him back. So he essentially already released the Suicide Squad, which is not really a reboot, but not really a sequel to the first movie. It does take place in the same universe. Some of the cast members come back, but it doesn't touch on the first movie at all. And he also wanted to do it because by any chance, if they do want to go back to the Snyder route, they can easily do a director's cut of the Suicide Squad. Not the Suicide Squad, Suicide Squad 2016 release. While he did the Suicide Squad, he did release Peacemaker. It was a spin-off show of the Suicide Squad, based on the character's Peacemaker. He released that, and yeah, it was really good, and it featured all the Justice League members. We didn't see Henry Cavill's face, Ben Affleck's face, or I think we didn't even see Cyborg at all. It was, and we didn't see Wonder Woman's face, but we did see like Ezra Miller as the Flash and Jason Momoa as Aquaman. So yeah, this was supposed to be a setup to the Flash and Aquaman 2. Then yeah, we get to 2020 two, where instead of Ben Affleck's Batman movie coming out, it was the Robert Pattinson Batman, which was originally a Ben Affleck Batman movie, and then we also get Black Adam. So Black Adam in itself, that movie was supposed to be made in it was announced in 06 that Dwayne Johnson was supposed to be either Black Adam or Shazam. But they didn't really go into production, I think, until 2014. And then around 2019, Dwayne Johnson was busy making other films, and they wanted to release a movie in around 2019, 2020. But he was busy doing films, and by the time he was done, COVID had hit. And then he shot the film in 2021, but wasn't done with it. And here's why. At this stage, we had two headless, non-Henry Cavill Superman in Shazam and the Peacemaker. And obviously, us fans wanted the Snyderverse to be restored. Never did. Warner Bros. Then really kept changing things and making terrible movies, and kept making terrible mistakes. And the thing is, we love these casts. The cast members were perfectly casted. The issue is the script writing of the movies. We wanted, instead of doing a reboot, we wanted them to do a whole reset, and we expected the Flash to kind of do that to where we can get the Snyderverse. But here's the issue. It wasn't going to happen until Dwayne Johnson had Henry Cavill shoot his cameo scene for the end credit scene in September of 2022, this year, and the movie came out a month later. That gave us hope. And that was amazing. It was the best thing ever. Until this moment. It being rebooted completely. So apparently a couple weeks after Black Adam came out, what happened was Warner Bros. Hired James Gunn and his friend to run DC, in a sense, beat the Kevin Feige of DC. And so no one wanted to take this role. And since James Gunn he kind of has that knowledge because he worked with Kevin Feige for the Marvel movies, and he already made not just two good Marvel projects, but two good DC projects. They hired him, he took it over, and decided to do a whole reboot. A 90% reboot. The 10% is a weird thing. So they're bringing back not Aquaman. They're bringing back Jason Momoa, but he's going to be playing supposedly Lobo, and he's bringing back some of the cast members from his Suicide Squad movie into this universe, even though it's supposed to be a complete reboot and no soft reboot. And obviously the first thing we hear officially was Henry Cavill leaving. I did a video just not too long ago, and it really broke my heart because I really wanted Henry Cavill to come back. And I really wanted the Snyderverse to happen and get Justice League Part 2 and Part 3, but Warner Bros. Wasn't really going to give it to us. So yeah, we ended up with, now we're going to get a 90% reboot with the DCEU, which I'm happy for, but I'm sad. But here's an idea, and it's not my idea, it's I found it all over the internet, and it's, I think, a pretty solid idea. So obviously we're getting Shazam 2, Aquaman 2, Blue Beetle, and The Flash. They all take place within the DCU, but there's no point of watching those movies if they're doing a complete reboot. Here's my thing. James Gunn, if you're watching this, which I'm pretty sure you're not, release Justice League 2, 3, like, towards the end, right? I'd rather have Man of Steel 2, the Batman, and the movies we want as a fan, and then conclude it with Justice League Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4, right? To conclude this universe. This will conclude the universe, but also at the same time, since this will give you time, this will also give you time to do a good job in rebooting the whole entire DC universe. Because by the time you finish off doing these movies, you guys have perfect scripts for not just one movie, but a couple of the movies. You guys can start production in them and release at least 3 good ones in 1 year and start going from there, which will be a better route because at least it's not going to confuse the normal average audience. And at that point, I know you guys want to make money, right, off of from Blue Beetle, Flash, Aquaman 2, and Shazam 2. I mean, you guys will make money off of them if you just finish off the series by concluding it, give it a proper conclusion. So yeah, this is what the fans want. This will be good for the fans, but also for people who didn't really like the DCU and wants a full reboot. So yeah, that is pretty much the whole history of it summed up into a really small video. So yeah, thank you so much for this video, for watching this video. As always, please stay tuned for more content. Give this a thumbs up, share this video with everyone else, and yeah, have a great rest of the last couple of days of this year, and Happy New Year. So yeah.